I think we can start up now. If there are some people coming, I will start the introduction at least. I'm very happy, we are very happy to see so many of you. And it's, for me especially, as I've been working on Lebanon for so many years, it's also a special pleasure to see that Lebanon is still a focus of interest. What has changed for me is that usually has been disaster, disaster, disaster. And for once, there is kind of, how is it possible, the resilience of Lebanon? Why isn't this war-torn country with so many problems, not in a way, excuse me, but it's in Lebanon, it's a very relative term, going down the drain. Why isn't it exploding? Until now, it seems to go on. And we are then very pleased today, as a special treat, in fact. No, first we will have Tina Gade, who will present her report, Lebanon on the brink, at the brink. And she is a newly recruitment to NUPI. For the time being, only 20%, as she also have a scholarship to go to Italy. And, but we are very happy to have her, and I think you will agree with me that she's a very positive recruitment to NUPI in every way. And as a special treat today, we have Joseph Bahout, who has come from Washington, where he is actually visiting researcher at Carnegie Foundation. Before that, he has been for several years in Paris at the Institute of Political Science, and also involved in the diplomatic, consultant, yeah. And before that, that was when we met, but it's also because you are Lebanese of origin, and we have met on several occasions, but we also met at the St. Joseph University in Beirut. So now, first I will give the floor to Tina, who will present the report, her last report, and then after that to Joseph, who will comment on certain points, certain parts of it. And after that, we will open for questions. And I should also tell you the full text of the report you have had today as kind of executive summary that we have, and that you can find outside here. But the full text will be on NUPI's websites in some time. We are not quite sure of this, but maybe in 2 weeks or something like that. But you look after it. You will have the full report. This seminar is streamed, so it will also be on NUPI's websites. Just if I don't think that you have any objections to that. Well, so please now I will give the floor to Stina.
Can you hear me well?
No, because it's the projector.
Okay. Okay. Thanks everyone for coming. And thank you so much, Kari, for this wonderful introduction. I'm also very pleased to be here at NUPI. And thank you, Joseph, for being here in Oslo at NUPI. I'm very happy about that. And we've known each other for a long time, so I'm very happy that you now come to visit us at NUPI. So I'm presenting for you today a report that I have written for NUPI on Lebanon. And as Kari mentioned, there is now a policy brief available for you outside, and you will be able to find it later on the internet along with a longer version of the same reports. So the topic, as Kari mentioned, it's more positive. However, it's not really so positive, I'm sorry to say that. To begin with, we can say that the Lebanese case in many ways arguably constitutes a counterexample to research on violent spillovers in civil wars, because those very often emphasize the big potential for conflict contagion. But Lebanon has remained stable, or at least somewhat stable. The state has not collapsed, despite all of the massive pressures from the horrific war in Syria. Lebanon has, just to remind you of this, Lebanon has taken in 1.5 million refugees, Syrians. The official number is around 1 million, but that's only because UNHCR stopped registering refugees last May in 2015. So the official number is lower than the real one. There is also no precedent in Lebanon. There has not been for more than 2 years. And in the absence of a president, the government doesn't work properly. And there is no parliament that is constitutional, because the parliament has seen its mandate being extended twice unconstitutionally. So without institutions, with 1.5 million refugees, and with no real border demarcations in mountainous areas in Lebanon, and also with the similar religious and political cleavages in both countries, it's quite... I mean, one could have predicted that there would be a civil war in Lebanon, and we haven't seen that. However, we have seen a real destabilization. Lebanon currently faces two crises. For once, the population has... For once, there is the internal political crisis since 2005, which pits the March 14 alliance, led by Saad Hariri, a Sunni, against the March 8 alliance, whose main actor is Hizbullah, and whose Secretary General is the charismatic Hassan Nasrallah. The Christians, however, are split between Sunni Christians with the 14th of March alliance and Shia Christians with 8th of March alliance, which also shows their weakening in the Lebanese system since 1990. So the crisis began actually after Rafiq Hariri, the former prime minister that you know, was assassinated in 2005, and one could have imagined, and one imagined in 2011 that when the war broke out in Syria, that the situation would get much worse, and this is why the Lebanese government decided that it would remain neutral in principle to the Syrian war. However, this neutrality principle was violated quickly by Hizbullah, which intervened in the Syrian war, as you know, and there is approximately 10,000 Hizbullah combatants in Syria currently. Moreover, there are approximately between 1,000 and 2,000 Sunni Jihadis fighting in Syria, mainly with the Nusra Front, but also with ISIS and smaller groups. I'm sorry to give you a very rough number, because I had heard 1,000 until very recently, and now I heard 2,000. So this is why I say this. So the refugee crisis comes on the top of this internal domestic political crisis. And actually, one out of 30% of the Lebanese population is now a refugee. If one adds also the Palestinians, 450,000, and the Palestinian refugees from Syria. So, yeah, that's the highest refugee ratio in the world, of course. And a big problem in the refugee response has been that the government has actually dealt with the conflict in very politicized ways. The opposing factions have dealt with the refugee crisis as a function of their opposing views on the Syrian crisis. So despite all of this, Lebanon remains outside protected of civil war. What explains that? That brings me to the research questions of the report. Firstly, the resilience, and secondly, what are the tipping points? Because one can also say that, of course, there is no civil war right now, but we could turn it around and say that in 10 years, one can ask the question, if there was a civil war in 10 years, one can ask the question, what led to civil war? Looking at these tipping points. So first, in the report, I identified some points of resilience, and I found that actually what led to resilience in the Lebanese case is mainly systemic and conjunctural and international. Well, I'll explain that in a bit, makes it more you see these 4 factors that are the most important ones. So actually what very many Lebanese would say is that Lebanon has not seen a new civil war because of the prior experience of civil war, or which would vaccinate against a new one, or because of the consociational democracy, which hinders clear winners and losers, and therefore helps us prevent dictatorship. However, this consociational democracy didn't prevent the civil war between 1975 and 1990. So actually, both of these factors are quite, I don't think that, I didn't find them completely reliable, especially because there are cases such as the DRC, where you have a long history of civil wars and an old one doesn't vaccinate against a new one. So the main factors that I identified were these 4. And the most important one, I believe, is that the opportunity cost of state breakdown for all of the actors is absolutely too high for anyone to be willing to risk state breakdown. And that goes for Hizbullah, which is the largest military actor in Lebanon, and as mentioned, is heavily under pressure in Syria and therefore doesn't want to risk to open a new front in Lebanon. It also goes for the institutional Sunni leadership, Saad Hariri, who is very weak now in an extremely difficult financial position, and he would have everything to lose, and especially access to state patronage or international support if he went onto any military ventures. Saad Hariri, as you know, he's a secular leader, and there was a short period between 2005 and 2008 with some military security companies, but after 2008 and Hezbollah's occupation of West Beirut for 24 hours, turning the weapons inwards, Future gave up any military adventures and has since then been extremely giving a lot of concessions to Hezbollah, to the point that it is risking its own popularity. So Future is perhaps the actor in Lebanon that would have the most to lose in the case of a civil war, because it would immediately lose all of its domestic support because it's not a militant actor. Thirdly, actually, the Sunni Islamists and the Salafis, they have neither been willing to risk a war, because for now, the opportunity costs risking their legal existence is far too high. And this is why we saw that when in South Lebanon, near Saida, in 2013, an Islamist leader attacked the army and called upon Islamists all over Lebanon to support him. Actually, no one rallied him or supported him. So it's actually been quite striking the point to which Islamists have been, the leaders at least have been trying to contain the youths and work actually as mediators, because now in the face of ISIS, they become very, very afraid of ISIS, and they do everything they can to calm the youth down for now. But this can, of course, change over time if the opportunity cost is changing. So for now, among the Sunni youths, there is a lot of frustration, but no willingness to translate this into militant action. And because none of the actors in place, neither Hizbullah nor the Future Movement or anyone else among the domestic political actors in Lebanon, want to risk a civil war, they finally agreed in the beginning of 2014 on a government security plan. So the army, after a long period between 2011 and 2014, during which there was an escalation of the security situation, this came to an end with the security plan in 2014, when the army was deployed in sensitive areas, and mainly in the north of Lebanon in Tripoli. And the army was not only deployed, it was also given mandate to intervene and make arrests, which was something new. So political willingness created security plans that completely actually were surprisingly successful and have been respected with some violations, but mainly respected. Also in Arsal, which is in the Bekaa Valley, next to the Syrian border, jihadis that have come from Syria have been operating. And these jihadis attacked the army in 2014, in August in 2014. But after that, actually, the army coordinated with Hizbullah, and this helped neutralize the jihadis, more or less, although they're still present, and seal the border. So political willingness, along with security plans, army deployment, has helped calm the situation down. That's the first and most important factor, in my opinion. Secondly, and that's also important, no regional or international actor wants to see Lebanon destabilized. First of all, there has been international political aid to Lebanon, meaning support to the state, to the judicial system, to the army, a lot of material, technical support to the Lebanese army from the United States, from Great Britain, and help to demarcate the borders. There's also, of course, been the international aid, economic assistance to the refugees, between 800 million and $1 billion every year, which of course hasn't covered all of the needs, but Lebanon would never have been able to tackle anything of the kind without this enormous aid. At the regional level, we can also say that Lebanon is no longer the main arena of regional Middle Eastern proxy wars, as it used to be in the 70s and 80s. The tension now, or the regional wars, have shifted. There's so many places they take place. I mean, you have Yemen, Iraq, Syria, etc. So Lebanon has. Most people now see that war in Lebanon would be costly, and it wouldn't bring any additional benefits. And this is also true for Saudi Arabia. As you may know, Saudi Arabia had pledged $4 billion of military support to the Lebanese army back in 2014. But early in this year, during the tension with Iran, it withdrew the support because it considered that the army was being influenced by Hizbullah. As mentioned, they coordinate a lot in the Bekaa Valley, etc. So they withdrew the support for this reason. However, this means that Saudi Arabia doesn't want to support Lebanese state institution, doesn't want to support Hariri in the same way as before, but it doesn't mean that Saudi Arabia has an interest in destabilizing Lebanon as for now. But we can discuss this later if you wish. Thirdly, the financial system. And I'm not an economist, but I made some very interesting interviews lately in the Lebanon Central Bank and with some economists. And this point is actually sometimes underemphasized, I believe, in the research literature. Lebanon's banking system is extremely liquid, meaning they have a lot of capital flows. They have the central bank is completely independent from the government, which is, of course, favorable. And this secures financial stability and confidence to the Lebanese financial system, the banks. It provides, the central bank is quite active. It provides housing loans at a subsidized rate and loans to sectors in the economy to spark economic activity. And when very often says that Lebanon has a very big debt, meaning almost 150% of GDP, which $75 billion, which is enormous. But at the same time, these loans or these treasury bills are being held by local Lebanese actors. So Lebanon doesn't have to negotiate with the IMF or anything of the kind. These are local loans, and that's very important. And this, fourthly, the refugees have been able to find informal ways to integrate the Lebanese economy. The topic of my report wasn't really the legal situation of the Syrian refugees, which is disastrous. And I recommend the work of Maya Janmyr if you're interested in this topic, because she works a lot on this from the legal point of view. But it suffices here to say just that the Syrian refugees, they're not considered refugees in Lebanon. They're considered displaced persons because Lebanon hasn't signed the Geneva Conventions of '51, and therefore there are loads of legal challenges to the Syrians in Lebanon, which creates enormous precarity. At the same time, that being point one, at the same time, Syria and Lebanon, as you know, used to be two countries. The Lebanese economy has always been an outlet for the much more regulated Syrian economy. So the economies used to be complementary during Assad, and also during the Syrian military presence in Lebanon between '76 and 2005. Therefore, many Syrians have earlier been to Lebanon as workers. They have networks in Lebanon, and they also rely on family members, relatives, to take up loans. So they have a lot of coping strategies, although I must say their situation is extremely precarious. So turning now to the tipping points. Because stability is extremely vulnerable. And as mentioned, maybe we will see in 10 years if Lebanon, it's not sure that Lebanon will remain in 10 years. And if that is the case, we will ask the question very differently. There are military risks, but there is also the risk of long-term, stable, and very slow economic degradation and decline. Firstly, the tipping points. The first one would be if ISIS decided to open a front in Lebanon. So far, ISIS does not consider or hasn't really wanted to open battles in Lebanon. It has seen Lebanon as a place to rest, as we mentioned with Erling, which is sitting there in an article some months ago. So a lot of ISIS fighters go to Lebanon, to North Lebanon earlier, and now to Arsal for hospitalization. This phenomenon has been reduced because the border has been sealed by Hizbullah, but it used to be the case up until the Battle of Qusair in 2013. So early on, the jihadis would go to North Lebanon for hospitalization. Now they only go, sometimes some of them infiltrate the border to Arsal in the Bekaa Valley. So they go to Lebanon to rest and to be hospitalized, but they don't go there to open a battle. However, there have been, as you know, suicide bombings in Shia areas in Beirut and even in a Christian area near the border recently. If ISIS decided to open a battle, this would change the opportunity cost for all those extremely destitute youths that exists in northern Lebanon and also in the Bekaa. Many of them have never seen the state given them a lot of services. And Salafism as an ideology is very present. So many people, since they haven't received anything from the state, don't really identify with the state either. So all these people, many of them have enormous grievances against Hizbullah, but they have not been willing to take the risk to open a battle as for now. But if ISIS changed its strategy, this could certainly change. And this is also related to the risk of disintegration of the Lebanese army. As you know, the Lebanese army is a multi-religious army, which means that it is constituted by the leader is a Maronite military commander, and at the level of the officers you have a 50-50 balance, but at the level of the rank and file you actually have a lot of Sunni Muslims who don't, of course, have any influence over the decisions of the army. They're normal, regular soldiers, and they join the army for livelihood purposes because they have no other opportunities, being often from destitute areas, especially from Akkar. So many of these Sunnis who are in the army, they're among those who are the most critical to the army commander's position, being very close to Hizbullah. And there was a real deterioration in the relationship between the army and Sunnis in recent years, but this improved with the security plans. But of course, if ISIS changed its strategies, the situation could deteriorate again, and there could be other risks also. For instance, if there was a suicide bombing in Beirut and this led to street clashes, and if the army intervened on any side, this could lead to fragmentation of the army. Also, if the army didn't intervene, it could also lead to accusations against the army. So the army is in an extremely precarious position because it wants to be seen as legitimate by all, but it's really difficult for the army commander, being criticized on all sides. And so thirdly, how much time is there still left? 5 to 10 minutes, very good. So the third risk that I identified is the risk of Hezbollah's ambitions, domestically in particular. As you know, Hezbollah's armed branch, the resistance, is much more powerful than the Lebanese army. There is no comparison at all. And Hezbollah domestically has been criticized for using its weapons to block the Lebanese system, meaning that when it turned its weapons inwards and occupied West Beirut for 24 hours in 2008, it was able to use its weapons to force its own desires and take the concessions from the government. So Hezbollah uses sometimes its weapons to obtain concessions from the state and blocks the representative institutions. Hezbollah has been active. Hezbollah's position is an important reason why it has been difficult to elect a president for 2 years. So Hezbollah firstly contributes to the deterioration of the representative institutions. For now, I don't think the discussion of what Hezbollah would ask from the state if it returned victorious from Syria is very relevant, because the war is long-lasting and Hezbollah will probably, in my opinion, not return very soon. Hezbollah needs guarantees from the state to be able to know that it will be able to protect its resistance, to maintain its weapons, which is its main interests. Also, Hezbollah's ambitions could also lead to conflict with Israel, unlike what a lot of people think. The level of conflict with Israel is not lower now than it used to be. Although Hezbollah is deployed heavily, massively, 10,000 soldiers in Syria, the intensity of conflict with Israel has been maintained. And you see that in the Syrian part of the Golan Heights, and you also see it by the fact that Israel has bombed a lot of military arsenal and deliveries in Syria that were believed to go to Lebanon. Israel has bombed military equipment of Hezbollah. Israel has also, as you know, killed several army Hezbollah commanders. And recently, in December last year, Samir Kuntar, which is a Lebanese Druze, very important figure, at least symbolic figure in Hezbollah, was killed in south of Damascus, probably by an Israeli drone strike. So the level of intensity is quite high. Moreover, there is a concern concerning Hezbollah's ability to contain the Shia streets. As for now, Hezbollah hasn't lost any of its popularity among the Shias, because it has instrumentalized a very sectarian discourse in order to justify its involvement in Syria. For instance, Nasrallah, who is extremely charismatic, speaks a lot about takfiris, Jihadis, as an existential threat. And this mobilizes a lot of Shias, especially in the aftermath of suicide bombings in Shia areas in Beirut. This, of course, echoes this fear. But at the same time, the meaning of martyrdom has changed for Hezbollah, because Hezbollah has a martyrology. I mean, it uses its martyr to mobilize support for the resistance. And the martyrs that died against Israel are seen as being extremely legitimate, and they legitimize Hezbollah vis-à-vis the Shia. However, the martyrs who die in Syria do not have the same, they don't carry the same emotional, symbolic meaning. Hezbollah's loss of control over the youths could lead to street fights with Sunnis, for instance, after suicide bombings of Shia areas. As for now, Hezbollah contains Shia reactions. But if Hezbollah was less able to control the street, this could lead to street fights. And we see already now that there has been a rise of tension in Shia areas, less discipline. As you see, Hezbollah's fighters are known for their extreme discipline. But recently, Nasrallah has told his supporters not to shoot in the air, which would mean that he has problems of people shooting in the air, which never used to happen before. So there are some small indications that Hezbollah might lose its some discipline, some ability to discipline its youths. And a thug phenomenon among the Shia could, of course, be very dangerous. Fourthly, the economic risks. Unemployment has been increased because of the arrival of of the Syrian refugees, as you know, as I mentioned, the population has been increased by 30%. So of course, what will happen to the labor market is that, especially if you have a lot of unskilled laborers without any rights, legal protection, who can work for 50% what the Lebanese do, of course, the low-skilled Lebanese workers will see their conditions deteriorate. People prefer to employ 2 Syrians instead of 1 Lebanese in many sectors. Although Syrian labor is formally closed, formally only open in construction and agriculture and cleaning. But in practice, Syrians occupy very many other positions as plumbers, restaurant waiters, etc. Poverty has increased among many Lebanese. Many of the poorest people who lost their jobs, etc., have seen their livelihood being decreased by as much as 30%, and the poverty rate the formal poverty rate has increased from 27 to 30%. Although I definitely believe the number is much, much higher. There is a big problem of statistics in Lebanon, so don't believe in all of these statistics. The poverty is very, very high now, and there has been a sanitary decline, infrastructure decline, water quality, etc., etc. And this leads me to the 5th point. The refugees are often blamed for the economic stagnation in Lebanon. I didn't mention that growth has declined from 8.5% in 2009 to 1.2% as of 2016. So the refugees are being blamed for this disastrous economic situation, and also many Lebanese believe that they are to blame for the security situation. However, I mean, they really accuse them, and there's a lot of racism against Syrians. Recently, after an attack against a Christian area in El-Qa, in the Bekaa Valley, in the northern Bekaa Valley, you would have a lot of curfews. Syrians couldn't go out after a certain hour, and even in this area near Beirut, there was a sign saying Syrians are not welcome. Entry will happen on your own responsibility. So, I mean, of course, this is not done by the state or anyone like that, but there is a tendency of some vigilantist groups that is, of course, being contained by the authorities, but which is a huge risk. And of course, there's also the potential that in the long run, social entrepreneurs could mobilize refugees' frustrations. But so far, there's been extremely low willingness by political actors, by Lebanese Sunni actors, to take advantage of politically of the refugees. The refugees are not being politicized at all. At least this is what I see. Maybe by some Islamists in the long run, and I think that research should look into this. So, to conclude and sum up, Lebanon's fragility is extreme. The stability is extremely precarious. Resilience can be explained by international factors, conjunctural factors, systemic factors, and mainly by the fact that the opportunity cost of state breakdown is too high. There are some military tipping points that we mentioned, ISIS, Hizbullah, etc. And the opportunity cost of war could change, and this could lead to a huge destabilization. But I do believe that economic long-term risks are the potentially most dangerous ones. Thank you, and sorry if I took more time.
Thank you, Tina, for a very thorough, very good presentation of the various problems facing Lebanon, the refugees, and the Lebanese population. And I'm now glad to give the floor to Joseph Bahout. We'll develop some of the points further, and after that, we will give the floor to you for questions.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kari, and allow me first to say that I'm very happy and very honored to be here at NUPI. at the invitation of a very dear friend and colleague also, and former alumni, because we studied together at Sciences Po and we worked together at Sciences Po, and I'm very happy to see Tine going through into what is probably seeming a very brilliant and promising career, and I wish you luck in your new endeavor here, and I really congratulate Nupi for such a catch. And thank you very much, Kari. It really, as you said, remind me of very happy times in Beirut, where we met first, and we had long discussions about things that are common, like the memory of war and former fighters, and the reintegration of militias and Lebanese political life. So I'm very happy also to be very kindly welcomed here at your place. Thank you. In fact, I was very embarrassed when I've read Tine's report before coming here to comment it, because in fact I actually completely agree and concur with most of it, even with the organization of the paper, because in fact it happened that I made a similar exercise in Washington a few weeks ago, and in fact it turned out that we exactly wrote the same thing. So either we are both wrong or we are both right. The future will tell. But although I had to do something in order to justify my invitation here, I'll try to say a few things that are different. And in fact, I will exactly take the same points that Tine has mentioned, and these what she called the tipping points, and I will put them maybe differently. I will probably highlight a few factors within these tipping points that seem to me maybe more important than others, and probably highlight, or let's say underline some factors that seem to me more dangerous. But mainly what I will do, and this will be the second part of my presentation, I will try to put all this in what seems to me very important, which is the unfolding of the Syrian crisis. I think that the future of Lebanon in the short run, i.e. the coming years, or the mid-run, the 5 years to come, or the 10 years to come, is very much function of what will happen in Syria. I think it's completely useless to try to understand the dynamics in Lebanon. Not useless, but it's limited to understand the dynamics in Lebanon without taking into account the dynamics in Syria. First of all, just to introduce all this, I will say to Kari that I would like to follow you on the, let's say, upbeat reading and the optimistic feeling that Lebanon is so far escaping the conundrum in the region. It is, by any standards, and I think that when you look at today the Middle East landscape, I mean Iraq, Syria, or even further in Yemen, Bahrain, Egypt, Libya, and etc., Lebanon is of course an oasis of stability and resilience. But I would say, and here I'm more in tune with Tine, that, and I think that it's a miracle that Lebanon escaped so far. I think most observers, among which myself and others, very quickly after Syria broke out, were believing that Lebanon would follow very quickly. It's so far a miracle that Lebanon has stayed a bay of this violence. However, like all miracles, I think it is ephemeral. I mean, all miracles finish by ending, and what we are here to do is to try to understand how they will probably end, or alas, will end at one point. And here is where I agree very much with Tine. So I would single out among all what Tine has said, for me, three important drivers of instability, of erosion, let's say, of the Lebanese resilience or fragility. And exactly the three of them are, first of all, the refugees, this sociological demographic change in Lebanon. And I will say a few words that add to what Tine has said. The second one is the security, and here I almost fully agree with her. And the third one, which I think is, and I fully agree also with you, Tine, that it is underestimated by most analysts and observers, is the economic, financial, banking, let's say, sector factor, which I think is very important. But what is more important than these three taken aside, and each one of them is important, is the merge between the three. I think it's the convergence between these three that at one point would provoke sometimes, at some point, probably a flare-up or a real tipping point of instability. And I will try to explain where they could converge and how they could converge. A few words, first of all, on the refugee issues. Completely, I mean, you said it all, but just to give you a sense of the magnitude of this phenomenon, because some people abroad don't really see what we are talking about. First of all, for Syria, the amount, I mean, the size of the crisis and the catastrophe for Syria. Syria is a country of 22 million people, I mean, more or less, at the eve of the revolution. As you said, figures are always in the Middle East to take with a grain of salt. But let's say 22 million Syrians. Today, you have 11 million Syrians that are uprooted, that are outside their homes, meaning half of the country is displaced. Half of this half is internally displaced in Syria, people from Homs in Damascus, people from Deir ez-Zor in Dar'a, etc., etc. And half of the half is externally displaced and dispersed in the regional countries, in Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon mainly, and then a small proportion in the West, in Europe, and a very few proportion in the United States. Now, Lebanon, within this stock of refugees, is taking the largest share, not in absolute terms, but in relative terms, per capita. And today, by all standards, Lebanon is the country that has the biggest number of refugees in the world, per capita. Teen said 1/3 of the Lebanese population is refugee. It is probably true and probably more than this. Meaning, just to give you an idea, because I think that images are more important than figures, it is exactly as if the entire population of the United States tomorrow would emigrate to China, or if the entire population of Canada would pour into the United States. This is the magnitude of what we are talking about. Now, the figures are very important, but what is more important, and here maybe you should maybe push further your reasoning, is the qualitative distribution of refugees. You said it enough, Lebanon is a sectarian fabric, it's a sectarian construction. It happens that 80% of the refugees, who are almost all of them Sunnis against the regime, chased from Syria because of the actions of the regime and its support, meaning Hizbullah, are placed in Lebanon in regions where Hizbullah is very powerful, meaning that the potential of clash, of friction is already there. It is not potential, it is already there. What is potential is the quote-unquote weaponization of these refugees, and this is where you exactly are right. It lacks and it takes a political entrepreneur to do it, but at some point it will probably happen, if not now, in 5-10 years of now. And I hate to take this parallel, but I have to take it. We have already the experience of the Palestinian refugee population in the 50s, 60s, and etc. When regional considerations and conjuncture changes, this population, this displaced population, this refugee population will be at some point instrumentalized in any political, regional, international adventure. So this is the first driver of instability. The second one that is correlated very much to it is the security one. You said it. Almost 10,000 Hezbollah fighters. The figures are not very clear, and in fact they fluctuate. I mean, in periods of low tension in Syria, they are around 5,000 to 6,000. In periods like now, where the regime is trying to reconquest Aleppo and crucial places, it increases until 10,000, which is enormous for Hezbollah. Most of the specialists say that the battling force of Hezbollah is in total something like 22,000, meaning that half of Hezbollah today is fighting in Syria. So you have these people, and you have to see it in a dynamic term, not in a static term. These 10,000 are crossing almost every day between Lebanon and Syria at some points on the border, coming, going back and forth to refurbish, being fed and taken care of and go back. You have the 2,000 jihadis, although I think the number have decreased recently because of the Lebanese army's capacity of controlling that. But what's important to put it in mirror with the refugee situation is that these Hezbollah fighters are crossing the border to go kill Syrians in places where the refugees are. So at one point, I mean, the clash will occur. People will say, okay, these fighters are going to Homs or Aleppo to kill my brothers there. So when they are coming back, I will ambush them and shoot them. So it will occur. It's a matter of time, and I think this is something very important. On the issue of Hezbollah's resilience, how far it is strengthening in Syria, how far it is weakening, I will say a few words in a minute. The last factor, and this is where also I think that your report is very important, and on to the point because it singles out and highlights really the economic situation. I think that this is important. I will add a few things. You said everything about the Lebanese macro structure, the Lebanese macro economy. I would add an additional recent, in fact, factor of instability potentially, which is due to two things. You know that Lebanon is today, with other cases in the world, due to this discussion about fiscal paradise and banking paradise and etc., is singled out as one of the most opaque places in the world where you can put money and circulate money. This has a very crucial, intimate relation with the Syrian war. First of all, just to remind you that the Syria's nomenclatura, the Syria's leadership is under sanction internationally today. However, these sanctions are largely bypassed by the Syrian regime through the Lebanese banking system. And there is today an effort in the US, and I can witness to that because I see the congressmen that are working on that, to strengthen the measure of control on this capital flow, which is enormous, which means that there is a strain on the banking sector in Lebanon to open up, be more transparent in the books, in what is happening there. The same for Hezbollah. You've heard about this recent bill that has passed in Congress, which is very important, the HIFTA law, that requires the banking system to stop any monetary financial flow and exchange through the Lebanese banking system that has anything to do with Hezbollah. And it is by far wider than the military aspect of Hezbollah. Just to give you an example, if you are the owner of a small shop in Lebanon that sells, I don't know, refrigerators or cars, and one of your clients is a MP member of Hezbollah, or someone who works in a school belonging to Hezbollah, or you advertise on the television of Hezbollah, you cannot anymore cash a check in the Lebanese banking system for your services, because this money will be sanctioned by the American Treasury. And no bank in the world would dare to challenge the American Treasury, because it means that you stop working. So in fact, this will have an effect. This will have an effect on strangling Hezbollah at one point, but it will have an effect on the Lebanese economy. I was talking to a friend of mine in Beirut recently who owns a bank. So yes, it happens that I have friends who owns bank, but I mean, I don't share the same wealth, I can guarantee you. And he was telling me that if the Americans are serious in going through in this system, this will ultimately ruin the Lebanese banking system, because the banking system is really built on this banking secrecy. And he was telling me the problem is not Hezbollah or the dirty money of the Syrian regime. The problem is that a wealthy depositor from the Gulf or from Lebanon, who in fact is putting his money in the banking system of Lebanon because it is secret, will not do it anymore. Not because he is escaping something, but he doesn't want to. So he will go to Switzerland or to Bahamas or to any other banking place, which will in fact lead the system to crumble. So it's in fact the convergence of all these factors, the three drivers of instability, that will probably produce at one point a kind of erosion. Now, I said that I would put all this in the mirror, in parallel to Syria. Here, very quickly, I see three scenarios in the year to come and in the maybe 2 to 5 years to come. And these scenarios are from the more probable to the less probable. The more probable, by all means, if today you look at Syria, is the scenario of the quote-unquote status quo. In fact, it's not a status quo, but it's the scenario of the permanence of the civil war in Syria, with, of course, fluctuations. It can go worse, it can go less worse, depending on the cessation of hostility, depending on the American-Russian ability to control the Geneva-Vienna process, which in fact is no more existing in reality, but it exists on paper. Let us say that in the year to come, largely also due to the fact that there are American elections, so everything will be frozen until probably next spring, the regime will stay resilient, the opposition will stay unvanquished completely, the Russians are controlling the air, however, the ground is not completely controlled. Syria is fragmented as it is today. There is a consolidation of the line of demarcations in Syria. So what would be the situation in Lebanon? I think it will be more of the same. It will be exactly the same than Tien described, meaning that you will have on the political level the permanence of the political vacuum, and it's not really worth it if we have to be realistic and serious to say you have to elect a president of the republic, you have to come to terms with these issues. Lebanese will not be able to elect a president of the republic and to make the system work efficiently as long as Syria is an open cauldron, as long as the Saudi-Iranian Cold War is less and less cold, by the way, is waged in Yemen, Bahrain, Iraq, Syria, and probably Lebanon at one point. It's not realistic to expect any unlocking of the political game. In this context, I think what Lebanese have to do is to try to inventively perpetuate the status quo and the miracle as long as they can. The government is less and less functioning. Even this morning, today, for example, there's a new crisis with the government. The Aonis are threatening of withdrawing, etc., etc. However, we have to meddle through. We have to kick down the can down the road and really try to wait for better times. And here the weight is, I think, on the Lebanese army to try to consolidate let's say, the security situation. Hezbollah will continue to take the political game in hostage, as you say, and trying also not to translate its bleeding situation in Syria in Lebanese terms. And this is, I think, the main challenge for Hezbollah, meaning to try to perpetuate the illusion that it is winning in Syria. The second scenario, which is a bit probable, because of the international situation, because of the American-Russian relations and etc., is the regime not winning completely, but strengthening, becoming stronger, or at least becoming stronger on the part of Syria that is bordering Lebanon. Meaning if Syria is fragmented, as we agree it is, however, for Lebanon, the problem is that its border is completely held by Hezbollah and the regime being strengthened by the Russian and Iranian control. In this case, probably if this consolidates, if the regime emerges as someone stronger and stronger, with probably the regime being rehabilitated increasingly by the international community because of the refugees issue, because of the security issues, to that date, we know that there are Western governments starting to open channels with the regime through intelligence services, the Germans, the Italians, probably some Scandinavian countries, the Spaniards. If this goes on, we will have to expect a new inflammatory situation in Lebanon. Why? First of all, I'll try to be quick. First of all, because probably the Syrian regime will be very much tempted to exert a certain amount of retribution in Lebanon. There is a list of people and forces that the Lebanese regime would try to settle scores with. People who took position with the revolution, people who tried to help the revolution without naming names, Hariri, Jumblat, mainly other people. There will be a wave of political violence in Lebanon, assassinations, attempts, etc. Second, it means that Hezbollah at that time will be very much tempted, and for me it will do it, not only tempted, to translate what it perceives as his victory in Syria in terms of political let's say, benefits in Lebanon, meaning it will, at that point, unlock the political game by coming to the Lebanese and say, okay, we have won in Syria, you have lost because you have bet on a change in Syria. Now we open up the Lebanese, the political game in Lebanon. However, we open it up under our conditions, meaning we revise in a way or another, either formally or informally, the Ta'if agreement. We put this famous basket that Hassan Nasrallah talks about every month when he says the political conundrum in Lebanon is in fact a basket of things that we want to negotiate. No one knows what is in this basket. At that time, we will know what is in the basket, and the basket will mean that Hezbollah will ask for a greater share in the Lebanese pie. Now, the more important risk in this context, in this scenario, and this is where I agree with you on the Israeli factor, my belief, and I think that everybody who talks to the Israelis now agree on that, for Israel, such a situation which will mean that Iran is in control of Lebanon, of course, but also of the southern border in Syria. This is a casus belli for the Israelis. This is where they could think that it is probably time to settle accounts with Hezbollah, first of all because there is an unfinished business since 2006, but also because at that point the 200,000 rockets of Hezbollah in Lebanon and now in Syria, because we have information that Hezbollah is installing permanent bases in Syria, will be something that in the deterrence mindset of the Israeli leadership, military leadership, will have to be taken care of. Now, the Israelis are very aware that this will be extremely costly, and this is why they are, in fact, waiting for this moment. At that point, the refugee population in Lebanon would really become explosive because it could be, at that moment, instrumentalized by a political entrepreneur for something or another. The last scenario, which is the less probable, this is why I will be quick, if, for example, if Hillary Clinton is elected and she decides to be more proactive in Syria, to try to reverse the gains that has been done by the regime, Russia and Iran and etc. She tries to be more balanced in the game. The regime is weakened, the revolution is maybe again on the rise and etc. I think that at that point, on the contrary, all this will be reversed. Hezbollah will be in a paranoid situation, fearing that its loss in Syria will translate in Lebanon. It will be probably tempted in a coup d'etat or in a coup de force, a way like in 2008. So the clash will occur, however, within a situation where Hezbollah is much less in the upper side of the balance of power, on the contrary, being weakened. In that sense, also the risk of an Israeli war over Lebanon is strong because the Israeli leadership could perceive that Hezbollah is weakened enough and now it is time to take over it. It will be probably a bloody war, but with less regional consequences than in scenario number 2. To conclude, I would say that in all these cases, so I mean, if we take all this, the drivers of instability in Lebanon and what is happening in Lebanon in conjuncture with what is happening in Syria, regardless of all this, I think that we have to admit that the Lebanese governance itself, I mean, forget about Syria and etc. The Lebanese governance, meaning the Ta'if agreement, the way the Lebanese lived since the end of their war until today, I think is today clinically over. It is dead. It is now, we have not acknowledged the death, but the cadaver is here. We all see it, but no one is ready to announce the funerals. I think that what is important today to understand is that this system is over. Lebanese have to begin to think about an alternative system. And what I would advise the international community to do, if it has to give a piece of advice to the Lebanese, is to use this lost time that is unavoidable for them to try to think over how and under which, let's say, equation they want to live once the regional dust settles, and it's not tomorrow that it will settle. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Very, very interesting to listen to you, as always. It's very good. It's not my role to comment on your... yes, please come on. To comment on what the speakers are saying, but I must say, I'm not optimistic. I'm more amazed of the situation. Yeah, there's not much room for optimism, above all on the middle term and above all longer. But now we will open for questions from the public. Please present yourself and also tell to which order, if it is to Tina or to Joseph that you are addressing your questions, or to both. Please, the floor is yours. We have micros coming around. Just up.
I'm sorry, I was a bit long.
Yeah, over here.
Hi, my name is Adam, and I'm a former student at AUB. My question is about, thank you for a very nice presentation, Tina, and also a comment by Joseph. My question is about the possibilities of institutional breakdown by all this. You have a lot of brain drain from highly talented young Lebanese people that are fleeing the country, either to Europe or to the States. How big is this fear? How is this going to affect the possibility of a destabilization of the institutions in Lebanon if this brain drain, which hasn't really stopped since the end of the civil war, and continuing with the Syrian civil war and its implications?
To answer immediately or take if okay, we answer. Go ahead.
Are there any questions very quickly now or no? Or then answer this and I will think. Okay. Tina?
How the brain drain will affect institutional breakdown?
Yeah.
I think, I mean, your question is excellent, of course. I mean, you're. I think it's a difficult question, and I mean, I think we should maybe look at the wider, as Joseph mentioned, the wider demographic changes in the population, with influx also not only of the brain drain, but influx of many refugees. 33 or 35% of whom are illiterate. So how this can also impact on the situation. And concerning the brain drain, I mean, I only answer you very partly, I realize that. But also on the brain drain, there is a brain drain, but at the same time now there are less opportunities in the Gulf because of the oil price. So this can also have an impact on the situation, because many people, I mean, it's more difficult to find opportunities, etc. But I hope maybe you can add something.
Maybe you
It's a very important question, as Tine said, because in fact it highlights one of the structural traits of the Lebanese fabric and economy. You know that Lebanon is a structural exporter of people. I mean, this is the main good that it exports. In fact, it doesn't export anything else besides some other interesting things. So let's say that there is a continuity in this phenomenon, and unfortunately the Lebanese economy has been built around this brain drain, because you know that the balance of payment in Lebanon and the foreign exchange in Lebanon is completely balanced by the remittances of emigrants. So it is something which has become a crucial pillar of the Lebanese economy. This is why it is today, I think, dangerous. The main danger, to answer your question, I see two dangers, in fact. The main danger is the potential drying down of remittances with time. Because of what Tine said, the Gulf being less a rentier, let's say, state productor, and second, because the West is in crisis. I mean, there's no growth in the West, so if you today emigrate to France or to Sweden or elsewhere, you won't be able to generate enough cash to make your family in Lebanon live. So this will be, at that moment, a pure drain, a pure loss. The second pure loss is that also it will affect the demographic fabric of the country. And this has to do with what I was saying at the end, the Taif agreement and etc. If you agree that Lebanon's political system is built on the parity between Muslims and Christians, but in reality between on the two-third, let's say, pillars between Shia, Sunni, and Christian, and if you agree with the premise that has to be examined, of course, factually, that main immigrants are Christians, it means that the country's fabric is changing, and that one day will have to translate into a political adjustment. And I think this is what I meant when I said Lebanese has to come to terms with the new reality. They can't continue to live as if they are in 1943. So the question is really very important.
Yeah, other questions? If not, in the meantime, I will add that for the brain drain, you can already see the aging of the population. That and that young people marry much later and have less children. So it's because they are married late. So it's those who stay. So it's a thorough change of the demography, and of course, as you say, the balance between the sex, the different religious communities. Who is next? Yes, please.
I think I just represent myself today. But what about the peacekeeping forces, UNIFIL? Do they have any role today?
Yeah. Maybe it's more to you.
I think,
What do you think?
yes,
Yeah.
they have a very, I would say they have a very crucial role. Now, of course, it is always a little bit, I wouldn't say ridiculed, but it is minimized and etc. But yes, they have a very crucial role in keeping at least, let's say, more than relative stability and peace on the border. Just to give you, I mean, an idea, it's quite amazing to see that since 2006 war, there were only 2 notable incidents on the border between Lebanon and Israel, and really very minor incidents that couldn't take proportion. So I think it's very important for the Israelis to have the UNIFIL on the border. It's very important to Hezbollah today to have the UNIFIL on the border. Just imagine that Hezbollah is fighting in Syria today with these 10,000 combatants, not having the UNIFIL in the south, so being also forced to keep 10,000 fighters facing Israel in the south. So the ability of Hezbollah to be able to go and fight in Syria is largely allowed by the fact that it has its back more or less protected in the south. So the south is a protected zone. Now, the day the scenarios that I have laid down explode and Israel decides to go for an all-open war against Lebanon, I think the UNIFIL will not serve as a sufficient shield. It will have to take a probably painful decision. But however, until today, the UNIFIL role is very important. A very interesting aspect has to do with what we were discussing before. I mean, the point on economy and etc. What we often don't see is that the UNIFIL is also a very important social and economic provider in the south. There are 7,000 UNIFIL. The contingent is 7,000. It's quite big. If you count that with these 7,000, you have an entire set of services that has to be provided: the catering, the health system, etc. Families that are there. It means that you have a whole sociology and economy revolving around UNIFIL, which is something also trickling down on the Lebanon system, on the Lebanese system as such. So it's a very positive effect, grossly speaking.
Yeah, would you like to add something,
No,
Tina?
it's good.
No? Sure. Please. Yeah, Morten.
Morten Bøos from NUPI. Thanks to both of you for very interesting presentations. I think that the issue of the economy and economic decline is crucial. But you mainly spoke about the more sort of formal aspects of the Lebanese economy. And there is also an important and strong informal aspect to the Lebanese economy, both internally but also very much externally, through various, I was going to say, diaspora trading communities all over the world, also in Africa. And how will that be influenced by that? Could that be some sort of a lifeline for at least part of the economy? The fact that this is so much a trading economy and also so much part of a global informal economy. So I would like to hear your views concerning that. Thank you.
Thanks for your question. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I mean, there wasn't enough time to speak about it, but there will be more on this issue in the reports. The informal aspects of the economy is, of course, extremely important, given that the Syrians now work in the informal economy. I mean, in addition to, for instance, smuggling, that hasn't been mentioned so much as far as I know in Norwegian or international media, but smuggling of products from Syria into Lebanon, agricultural products, meaning that for Lebanese farmers, income has been dramatically reduced also. Just if I may, concerning the economy, there are actually 3 different factors that have impacted on the formal and the informal economy. The first one is the closure of trade routes, because all of Lebanon's external markets, they don't export a lot, but what they do export, they export it to Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. So the Gulf routes through Syria are extremely important. Now they're closed, and only this accounts for 7 to 8% of the decline in the GDP. So it's extremely important for Lebanon. And the refugees, they come on top of this, with their increased consumption on the one hand and the increased economic assistance also, but also how they impose strains on the labor market. Given that now there has been a 30% increase in the Lebanese population, we would also, given that the refugees produce and to some extent work, we would believe that there would be an increase in the GDP actually, but the GDP has remained stable, meaning that income has been dramatically reduced for very many people, and particularly in the informal sector, because of dynamics going on in the informal sector. Concerning the external dimensions, yes, people can rely on links to the diaspora, and if I understand you correctly, also mean for the less skilled or urban poor potential of migration. So it's easier to migrate if you have relatives abroad, if you have a network you can rely on. And this is like what many Shia Lebanese have in Africa. And the Sunnis, they have less networks, so it's less easy for them to migrate. They have a little bit in Australia, but not so much. So actually, there has been a research on this, showing that for the least educated, especially the Sunnis that don't have networks, they have less desire to migrate because they don't have opportunities abroad. Sorry, I was a little bit long. Do you want to?
Maybe a few things. I think it's very interesting to look at the informal sector today in Lebanon, because also it's like migration. There has always been an informal sector, which is, I think, important in the GDP of the country. We've never really made the exercise of calculating it, but it has always been important. But the problem is that it is both positive and negative. There is a positive externality and a negative externality. If you take it on the domestic level, for example, what's interesting is probably Lebanon is different from the Jordanian and Turkish case of refugees, Syrian refugees, because Lebanon, differently from Jordan and maybe less from Turkey, has two sorts of population that are refugees. You have a very poor, unskilled, really desperate population, which is may be problematic, but also which is providing for some low wages, labor, which is interesting to adjust the Lebanese economy. But what we don't see enough is that it has to do with these nomenclatura money. You have big Syrian money that is also in Lebanon, and very rich Syrian refugees in Lebanon that are more or less pro-regime and etc. And if you today ask or try to understand why, for example, in a country that is in crisis, the real estate market is continuing to rise, it is in fact completely held by the Syrian demand, which is interesting. So there is a pros and cons in this issue. The second interesting thing on the domestic level is the war economy. Lebanon has partly a war economy, and it is interesting, and I think it would be an interesting research to do, Teen, on that level, to compare today's war economy to the civil wars economy, the 80s and the 90s. In these periods, part of the Lebanese economic resilience was due to the war economy. Transfers of money for war, let's say, activity. Today, it is a draining activity. It is something probably that is weakening the Lebanese economy. Here you have the external factor. My bet is that with the international crisis, i.e. the lower growth everywhere in the world, the end of the rent and etc., and also with the new regulations, which I was talking about, it's much more difficult today to channel informal money to Lebanon. And when you look at, for example, everything we read about the, let's say, the networks of Hizbullah in Africa, in South America, and etc., it is today much more difficult to channel this money into the Lebanese system, formally or informally. So I think that this will have to be probably a new, let's say, aspect of research that we have to do, and we have to admit that we don't know much about this.
Please. Yeah, you want.
Hi, my name is Nora Callender. I'm writing a master thesis here at NUPI. Thank you very much for the presentation, both of you. I guess my question can be directed to Joseph, as you talked a little bit about the perceived role of the U.S. in this case of Lebanon. You painted a pretty dark picture of the situation, and taking into account the support for Israel and the American role in the coalition against ISIS and the spillover effect from Syria. Can you say a little bit more about the predicted or perceived role that the U.S. will take after presidential election?
Okay. Yeah, thank you for this question, because it allows me partly to say things that I really believe and are not very nice to the U.S. policy over Syria. I personally tend to put a lot of blame and responsibility on what Syria has become on the American, let's say, action or inaction. I think that there were much more that could have been done to prevent the situation that we have reached today, and probably that if the US and other, let's say, international community actors were more proactive in 2013, 2014, probably we wouldn't be at the situation we are today in terms of fragmentation, of refugee generation, of ISIS growing. I mean, just to give you an idea, ISIS was in 2013 something like 5,000 to 6,000 fighters in Syria. Today we are talking about 35,000 fighters. So this exponential growth is largely, of course not only, but largely due to the vacuum that was left in this country. This is one aspect. The second aspect is the diplomatic aspect. If you look at the tremendous changes that have happened since 2013 until today under the Obama administration, the world has completely shifted the focus on the Syrian issue, and the Syrian issue being the explanatory factor of the regional factor. We are not anymore talking about solving the political dimension of the crisis. Today, the only obsession is how to fight ISIS, and even on that level, it's not how to fight ISIS on a structural level. It is how to retake Raqqa or Manbij or etc. You see, meaning making pinpoint punctual things that in fact are only needed for political consumption within the political system in the US for small political victory, communication victories of the administration. Now, what to expect next? I will put aside the black swan completely of Donald Trump being elected because, frankly, I don't know where we will be at that point, all of us. Although it is easy to understand what he will do in Syria. He will probably say, I don't care about this issue, I will handle it to Vladimir Putin and let him do what he sees fit to be done. And I think we will head towards an open catastrophe in Syria. If Hillary Clinton is elected, it's much more complicated. Three things very quickly. Her instinct, her natural instinct would be to be more proactive, to probably try to rebalance the game with Russia and Iran and the regime by probably providing more assistance to the opposition, maybe re-strengthening the rebellion on the ground, reversing the tide and probably pushing the regime to a forced negotiation. This is her instinct. The problem is two levels. First of all, the party, I mean, the Obamian, the Clintonian, let's say, milieu is very torn on this issue. Some people are much more in favor of the same politics, i.e. withdraw, let things be done, etc. The entire left wing of the party, let's say, and her own entourage, when you look at the names and what they did in the former administration or what they are writing, they are very much in favor of the continuation of the same policies. Some of them are in favor of pursuing. The problem will be the second level. What will be left of the Syrian reality when Hillary Clinton is not only elected, but able to try to start working on Syria, meaning next spring? Probably at that point, things will be very difficult to reverse. I mean, the opposition will be decimated. The Russians would have controlled much of the country. The international situation would have changed a lot. So even if she wants to reverse things, the reality will be very much difficult to reverse, and she will have to, in a way, wage an uphill battle in order to reverse things. So, in fact, politically, when you understand how the American system works, she will say, I would have liked to do, however, the constraints are strong. And this is exactly what Vladimir Putin's strategy is to use this time to maximize the benefits and the gains so that any administration in the US could not reverse it once it changes. And I think this is what is happening day to day in Syria now.
You want questions over here? Here in the front.
My name is Odd Wiebe, and I have a background, diplomatic background, both from Lebanon and Syria from the 1980s and 1990s, and I've listened with great interest and appreciation to both of you. Unfortunately, news from those two countries have not been very encouraging for many years. But I'd like to make a question to invite both of you maybe to look into the crystal ball from the end of what you were talking about, namely the need for Lebanon to look into developing a new system as basis for the state. Things have changed since 1943 and since Taif. However, when I look at Lebanon, what strikes me is the permanence of political leadership, the ownership of various factional and confessional groups. I heard a new expression to me of Sunni Christians and Shia Christians. Now that's a new one to me. But just to mention, there is a lot of self-interest in the leadership of the confessional groups in Lebanon. I remember in the 80s visiting Nabi Berri in a rather modest apartment in the southern suburbs. In the 1990s, when I came back as ambassador in Damascus, I was invited to his estate east of Saida, and it was really gave the impression of quite a warlord, a rich man, quite a difference in those years. And there is vested interest in all the political leadership in Lebanon. So my question is, what could lead these leaderships into being constructive for the state, for the nation, and not only in their self-interest? Could I invite you to look into the crystal ball on that question? Thank you.
Who will start on
Tin is just fresh from the country
Yes.
now.
Exactly.
Yeah, actually, when I met with one of the heads of the central bank recently, he said that for Lebanon, the biggest challenge is actually it's even one challenge as large as the refugees, in his opinion, and he worked on the economic aspects of this, is really the corruption. For instance, in the electricity sector, there are large deficits. There are electricity cuts, but Électricité du Liban, they also have deficits every year, and it accounts 1/3 of the budget of the balance of payment, the negative in the. Yeah. So 1/3 of the losses is only the corruption in Électricité du Liban. So you can imagine. Unfortunately, I personally don't really see big prospects of leaders being born that are constructive for the country. Unfortunately, you would have sometimes you would have some new leaders replacing the old ones. Like you see now, Ashraf Rifi is an emerging rising star among the Sunnis. Taking over for Hariri to a certain extent. But the system is such that a lot of people are induced to follow personal interests and to enrich themselves, etc. And of course, Hizbullah benefits from this because they portray themselves as the exception. However, are they? I don't think so. So maybe you can add. Do you want to add? Do you think that? Of course, we can speak about the social. Beirut. In the municipal elections in Beirut, there was a civil society list that it didn't win, but it gained good scores, made up by technocrats, civil society, also there were protests last year against the government wasn't able to collect trash for 10 months. So of course this was an opportunity for civil society to mobilize much easier than they could for issues such as civil marriage, etc. So they mobilized a lot of people. When Rifi, he was here some time ago in a closed meeting, he gained, as you know, Rifi gained 2/3 of the seats in Tripoli, and in cooperation with civil society actors. The difference between Rifi's list's gain in Beirut and the fact that the Beirut civil society list didn't win was they were not patronized by one big political leader. So perhaps in Lebanon you need some leader to channel and to co-opt frustrations. I don't know. What do you think, Joseph?
I would put your question, because I think it's very it's crucial for the future. I would put it in a more global, let's say, framework. My feeling is that the Lebanese system as it is, meaning this kind of political sectarianism structure, pre-Ta'if, post-Ta'if, etc., these are nuances, but this political sectarianism system has reached a limit. It is very difficult to repatch it up again. It is because this is a game of musical chairs. If you change today the proportions, you will have another problem in 15 years or in 20 years. So the system is generator of permanent instability. So this is the acknowledgement today. Now the problem is that exiting from the system is also very difficult, because the two exits you have are both as impossible as the other. The first one is to say very simply and maybe simplistically, let's abolish sectarianism and we become a country like Norway or Sweden or a Westminsterian democracy. This is very theoretical because we are in a country where identities are what they are, because the country has a fabric, because etc. And you have the risk of totalitarianism, of authoritarianism that will emerge in such case. The second path is to say, okay, let's acknowledge that we are a sectarian fabric and society and go towards a kind of confederation or federation and etc., which is also risky. However, it is induced by the regional developments. I mean, Iraq today is federalized. Syria will not probably exit from the war in a unified, centralized system if it stays one country. So probably we will have to look for something of this kind. I think that in the meantime, or even at that time, what has to be worked on in order to exit this vicious circle of having the same family names, the same forces that, you know, I mean, Teen knows that it's partly my PhD dissertation was on Lebanese elites. And when you look at the parliaments and the Council of Ministers since 1862 to today, you have the same names. I mean, more than 100 years without naming them. So in order to exit that, you have to probably work on 2 or 3 things that are concrete. One of them is the electoral law. I think that without a reform of the electoral law in Lebanon, it's illusory to try to think that the system will change. And the electoral law will have, you know, this is political engineering. This is the channel through which you provide new elites, you open ways to new forces, and etc. The second thing has to do with the sectarian fabric. Even if you keep the sectarian political system in place, you can open up non-sectarian social spaces like civil marriage, things have to do with housing, with credit, with etc. That will fluidify the society. And the third level is to invest in the local level, in the decentralized level, without federation or etc. Even on the municipal level, when you look at Lebanon today, the state is completely dysfunctional. It is dead, it is comatose. However, things are working on the local level. People are able to collect trash, to make internet work, to invest on the local level. So I think that there is something vivid and promising on the local level, and this is where probably the resurrection of Lebanon could be awaited from. So I think that we can work on these levels. However, this also takes a kind of more or less pacified regional environment. I mean, today, the obsession of the risk, of the physical risk, of the existential threat is so strong that you can't have the luxury to think about these things.
Thank you. Well, it's 10 minutes late now. Is there an urgent question? I don't think so, yeah, it doesn't look like that. And I will thank once again Tina and Joseph for the very, very interesting speeches, and also for the good questions to these many interesting questions, good answers to the interesting questions. And thank you very much for coming. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kari. You led it masterly.
Easy part.